Now we're looking at our timeline. We have the primary color correction done, so all the clips are neutralized. We've got that utility LUT on here. If you're shooting just a regular picture profile, that's a step you can ignore. We're gonna go ahead and start walking through our color grading process. This step is really cool because it's another element where you can bring branding into your videos, style into your videos, tone into your videos, and kind of even start developing a feeling in the color grade. Let's just go through the process. It's the same. We're gonna add an adjustment layer here. Again, going to drag that adjustment layer on top of our entire edit. And what you see here in tan, that's our titles. So we want those to be on top of everything. We don't want those to be affected by any adjustment layers in the timeline. Once again, color grading is gonna be personal preference. It totally depends on the tone that you've set at the beginning when we talked about planning your videos. That's going to determine how you're gonna color grade. And you don't have to do this step. You can just kind of put your video out there however you want to, but if you wanna add some style to your videos, this is a great way to do that. My process when it comes to color grading is once we have this kind of neutral base point, I'm gonna start adding blue to the shadows and adding a little bit of warmth to the highlights. Now, you don't have to do this. This is just my personal preference. Looking at the color wheels and match tab here, we've got 3 color wheels, one for the highlights, one for the midtones, and one for the shadows. As we start adjusting these parameters, they're going to start affecting whatever part of the image we're selecting. So if we go to the shadows color wheel and we start dragging this target down towards blue, you'll see the shadows starting to tint blue. Now, we want to be careful. We don't want to go too extreme unless extreme is the look you're going for, but sometimes easy does it on the corrections where you're just adding a little something different to your shot without overpowering it with color. Now, a lot of people tend to use LUTs for this part of the process, and I actually don't recommend using LUTs. They can be a really great starting point where you can add LUTs to your footage to see what your footage can look like, but LUTs are not a one-size-fits-all type scenario. Oftentimes that people develop LUTs based on a couple of clips, and if you apply them to your shot, which isn't shot in the same lighting or with the same colors or even with the same cameras, the LUT might not look the way it should on your footage as it did from the person you bought it from. So they can be a great way to learn, but I definitely recommend learning how to use your tools so you can start developing your own style from scratch. And honestly, this is the best way to do it. To understand all of your tools just makes you an all-around better cinematographer, photographer, videographer. So we're gonna drop these back a little bit, maybe bring this down a little bit to the teal color. If we turn that off and on, you can see it just added a little something to the shadows. So same with the midtones here. We can take this target and we'll go all the way extreme up to the reds. It's actually affecting most of the image because there's not a lot of, highlight and shadow in this shot. It's kind of a very even exposure. So we can double click this to reset it and bring that up a little tiny bit and just see what that does. And if we turn that off and on, it just makes it, a little interesting. So we can go back and add a little bit more blue to the shadows. And it's kind of all about massaging the settings here. You don't have to do one adjustment and then live with it. You can kind of go back and forth, move between the color wheels and the curves and your exposure and just kind of adjust it until you like how it looks. So again, down here with the highlights, we can show you what that looks like. It doesn't affect the shadows at all. It's just affecting the highlights. So we can move this to a little bit more of like an orange tone. So we turn that on and off. It made a little bit of a difference here, but I'm not loving the tone. So open up your curves and start changing tones here as well. This is just another parameter, another way that you can adjust colors in your images. Just to give you an example, hue versus saturation is where we can select a certain hue in the image and take down the saturation of that. So this is really helpful. Say if you're shooting with a GoPro and you have these really neon greens or really neon blues in your shot, you can take down the intensity of those colors selectively and it makes your shots look a little bit better and it's easier to match that footage to something like from a Sony camera. Just for an example, if we make 2 points here on the curve to select our reds and we just bring that down, this is not something that I would do, but just to give you an example, you can see that it basically desaturated the entire skin tones and then the red and the stop button. So if I turn that on and off, you can see what that did. So curves is a very powerful tool to add to your arsenal, and you can make a lot of difference in the way your clips look by using curves. So we'll reset that Again, here we can do the same with hue versus hue. We can actually select a tone and shift the hue of that tone, which is really helpful. To give you an example, let's change the hue of this red. I can use the eyedropper and eyedropper this red, and you can see that it isolated the red here in the curve with 3 points. So if I take that middle point and just drop it down, you can see that it's changing the color of red to green, or if I move it up, change it to purple or blue. And as I move it, you can see that there's colors that kind of show up here to show you what hue you're changing it to, which is super helpful when it comes to isolating certain tones in your images and making them look a little bit better. So we're gonna turn that off because that looks a little bit silly. I could sit here for another hour or two and tweak out this color grade to make it look how I want it to. It's kind of all trial and error. You understand the tools, and it's just about reworking the curves, the shadow tinting, and just kind of getting a look that you like. So I'm gonna pop open a project and show you my final color grade on this. If we look at the same clip that we were just working on, this is the final color grade that I have here for Heading East. If I turn that off, you can see that it is a little bit more stylized. We've shifted the hues a little tiny bit. And if we scroll over to even this GoPro clip here, if I turn off the color grade, you can see that it's very blue. It's neutral, but the blues are very blue. And when we turn on the color grade, we've actually shifted those blues to be a bit more of like a tealy turquoisey color. So that's kind of the joy of using curves. You can kind of push these tones around to make subtle adjustments in your color that actually make a really big difference to your end product. Another example of using curves to change the tones of your colors, if we look at this clip here, you can see there's a bunch of green trees in the background. If I turn off the color grade, you can see that the trees are like actually very green. So we've selectively adjusted the tones in that green, changed them to a more desaturated, warmer kind of look, which just adds a little bit of a stylistic look to the color grade. It's a little bit something different than, say, a normal green that you would find outside. And it's fun to play around with these tones that we've set out in our mood board and try to incorporate them in our color grade for the end product. That's my basic workflow on how I color grade a video. I recommend to you to get in there and play around, to just slide the sliders around and see what they do and manipulate things and just get a feel for what parameters change what in your image. All right, so we just added color grading to our workflow. Next up, we're gonna be talking about titles and visual effects.